Maybe you've heard the news and seen the headline and seen the tweets that the National Association of Realtors, the NAR, settled to take care of all these lawsuits. And because of that, there's a lot of misinformation. So I just want to take some time and explain to you what that settlement is and how it impacts buyers and sellers. Stick around. Hi, welcome back. My name's Joe Brown. I'm a realtor with Century 21, listed with Beggins, located in South Tampa. Thank you so much for being here with me today. So as I said at the introduction, I don't know if you've seen the headlines or heard the news reports, but there is a lot of misinformation surrounding the NAR settlement. So I just want to take some time to explain it to you because it has implications for sellers and absolutely has implications for buyers. So first of all, let's talk about traditionally what the process has been. So as a listing agent, I go to a seller, and let's say you're the seller. I go to you and say, I charge a 5% commission or 6% commission, right? I charge a commission and I split my commission with the buyer's agent. And then I advertise your property on the MLS, Multiple Living Listing Service, and I advertise what the compensation for the other broker is, whether it's 2, 2.5, 3. Let me stop right there and say there has not been a set commission ever. It's actually against the law, to say all real estate charges 6% or all real estate charges 5%. That's against the law. But it is common practice that the listing broker negotiates the commission that is split with the seller. And the seller, out of the proceeds, pays the listing agent the commission, and then the listing agent shares that commission with the buying agent. So now this settlement says, number one, we are no longer allowed to advertise the co-broke, that's the term, the co-broke commission on the MLS, right? Number two is agents need to get in writing, call it an exclusive representation, but a representation saying, I represent this buyer. And I'll talk about that in a second. It does not say, let's go back to the settlement. Settlement says, number one, we're not going to advertise what the compensation is going to be. Number two, there's a written agreement from an agent to the buyer. It does not say that the compensation, whatever it is, will not be paid by the seller. So here's the implication. So number one, as a seller, the process may not be very different for you. So as a listing agent, I will still come to you and say, I charge a 5% commission or I charge a 6% commission. And I'm going to share that with the other agent, right? That process may very well be the same. Now, from a buyer's perspective, and I'm going to come back to sellers, I have to go to the buyers first. When I sit down with a buyer, I say, I'm going to represent you. I'm going to search for homes. I'm going to negotiate the best deal for you. I will be there for the inspections. I'll review the paperwork. I work for you. Now, I don't work for free. So you have to agree to pay me, and then that's negotiated. You have to agree to pay me 2%, 2.5%, 3% of the purchase price of the house. Okay, that agreement. And we agree up front. So let's say, as an agent, not that I would do this, but there's an agent that says, I will represent you for 1% of the purchase price. So then that agent contacts the house and the other agent says, hey, by the way, we're offering a 2.5% compensation. Well, wait a second. The contract that the agent signed with the buyer says the buyer only has to pay 1%. The agent is not going to receive that other 1.5%. That money is going to be given back to either the buyer or the seller. Okay? It's not going to go to the agents. But that fee is negotiated ahead of time, even before going to show houses, right? So if, from a buyer's perspective, you call me and say, hey, Joe, I want you to be my agent. First thing we're going to do is we're going to meet and we're going to sit down. What are your expectations of me as an agent? I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do as an agent. And then I'm going to say, I will provide these services for X amount, right? So let's say it's 2.5%. So we write into the contract, the buyer is going to pay me 2.5% of the sales price. Not of a particular home, of any home, right? No matter what home we look at, 2.5%. And then we negotiate the deal. So in the contract, so let's say we find a house, we have a contract, we're going to write into the contract, the seller agrees to provide a 2.5% credit to the buyer at closing. So that credit covers my fee that I was going to charge the buyer. So that money is still coming from, I'm not going to say coming from the seller, it's coming from the transaction, okay? Now, again, I want to step back. There are some buyers who can pay the commission fee because they have that much cash. The vast majority of buyers do not have that extra cash because they're going to have to pay down payment and closing costs. And then if you think they have to add 2 to 3% on top of closing costs, they can't afford it. So let's go back to the contract. I say to you, as in the contract, the seller agrees to give a 2.5% credit back to the buyers at closing. Well, as in any contract, the seller may say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to agree to that. Well, you know what? The buyer may not be able to afford that house then, and the buyer walks away. The seller, who could have had the sale of their house, no longer has the sale of the house. So the implication for sellers is it is in your best interest to help the buyer pay the fee for their agent, right? Here's the situation with the buyer. And in fact, I just need to do a whole video on the buyer-broker agreement. I don't want to get into those weeds. But the process, sellers will still be asked at the listing presentation to expect to pay a commission or a credit to cover the fees for their agent and give a credit to the buyers to cover their agent. The buyer side, you're going to have an agreement with your agent for a certain amount. It can be a fixed dollar amount. It can be a fixed percent. Now, those agreements have an expiration, just like a listing agreement, maybe for 4 months or 6 months or for a year. Same thing with this buyer-broker agreement. It could be for 3 months, could be for 6 months, could be indefinite till you find a house, right? So usually it's a fixed time frame. So, right? So this NAR settlement is really dealing with, number one, we're not going to advertise any compensation in the MLS, even though compensation could still come from the sellers. I'm not saying it is. It could. It has to be negotiated. Number two, there's going to be a formal agreement between the buyer and the buyer's agent specifying how much the buyer's agent is going to receive. That's really what the NAR settlement is about. Okay? So I hope that, I think it's still muddy, but I hope that clarifies some. So if you hear 6% commissions are going away, that may not necessarily be true. Again, it depends on what the listing agent and the sellers negotiate. If you hear sellers no longer have to pay commission, well, yeah, that's always been the case. Is it really in your best interest, though? Right? If you want to sell your house, you have to give an incentive, first of all, to other agents to see the house, and you have to provide some support for buyers to buy the house. So anyway, I will do a follow-up video on the buyer-broker agreement. Just I don't want to get into those weeds today. Anyway, I hope this was informative. Reach out to me. Go to my website, joebrownc21.com. You can watch more of my videos. You can watch my blog. I'll put a blog about this in there probably in about a week. You can check that out. So I want to be your trusted advisor. So I want you to be informed. Okay? Until next week, take care.